Hey, how's it going? On this episode of Home Water Dispatch, I'm still in the Turks and Caicos Islands on the Caicos Bank. I think it's like 45 square miles of sand flats and bank and little coral rubble and seagrass, and then fringing the islands are these amazing red mangroves. And I'm taking this opportunity in this episode to reflect on a series of workshops that we had, one in Providenciales, and one here in South Caicos. The one on South Caicos ended yesterday. Sorry, I'm on my knees in the flats here. And we used that sort of multi-stakeholder workshop. We had fly anglers, guide associations, fisheries department. We had haulers, people that harvest bonefish for consumption for the local community. There was a wide range of stakeholders in the room, which you have to have all the stakeholders in the room if you want to understand the fishery and think about sort of management and regulations and the ecology of fish. All that's really important. So we had these amazing workshops. I'm super grateful to have played a part in those workshops. And what was really interesting to hear is how people with very different backgrounds were able to come together and find some common ground, and find common ground based on bonefish and their habitats. And if their habitats aren't here and the bonefish aren't here, lots of people suffer. The tourism industry suffers, the local community suffers from a historical perspective and cultural perspective. There's still some subsistence harvest and consumption. And so, and those are things that we need to recognize and appreciate, and not be so narrow-minded when it comes to thinking about recreational fisheries. And during these workshops, we provided an opportunity for stakeholders to really think about how bonefish are nested in their environment, the types of habitats that they use, and then the connections of how they move between one habitat and another. So it's stinking windy today. We were just up on the flats chasing some fish. I have lots of wind knots in my fly leader, of course. I tripped across a few bonefish. But it had me thinking more about this idea of the flats being a habitat mosaic, and how there's connectivity between the mangroves here along the shoreline. These are amazing prop roots. And so these prop roots, you can see I'm kind of like honking on them. They're pretty embedded in the substrate. And these prop roots are really good at filtering things that are coming off the land. Right? And so there's an amazing filtering mechanism for trapping sediment, and they're also really important for abating wave energy. These mangroves are really good at protecting the shoreline, and when you're on a small island, like here I'm on South Caicos, if I stand up, there's whoops, hang on, the camera's turning the wrong way, right? So like there's not a lot of elevation around me, right? So these mangroves are really important for coastal erosion. I'm gonna sit down again because it's a little more comfortable. So the mangroves are important, right? And we know that bonefish use mangroves in various ways, but also the seagrass is important too. So I'm gonna go and kind of go this way. I'm actually gonna flip the camera around, give you a sense of where I am. Wide open flat, right? Really cool. Mangroves over here. We've got sort of this habitat mosaic here where we've got some seagrass of various species. This is Thalassia. There's some macroalgae out here. You can see the sand flats and a bit of maybe loose sediment, and then it gets a little sandier. And that's what we mean by this flats mosaic. And okay, now I'm going to flip this around with my wet hand. Woo-doo-doo. Right? So that's our flats mosaic. And bonefish move through this space. Right now we were at a low tide, and there's not a lot of bonefish up on this flat because they're in slightly deeper water. And so understanding their movement patterns, the connectivity that they have between the areas of the flats that are closer to the mangroves, the deeper channels, the back bays, and the wide open flats is critical for their conservation and management. And there's various ways that we can understand that, different tools in the toolbox in terms of how we can do some science to provide sort of objective data to inform conservation and management. And so that was also included in this workshop, where we really talked about the different life history stages of bonefish and what we know and what we don't know, and how we can fill those gaps with local ecological knowledge to begin with, and then with some science. And so thinking about the, I had something swim by me and something's tickling my leg. And so we had these broader conversations about connectivity, about matching and thinking about the movement patterns of bonefish, whether they're on the flats or ultimately going to their bonefish spawning aggregations or their spawning aggregation sites, which are very specific and far away from here. And so I posted it on my Fish Mission Instagram, this massive school of bonefish. I've done a whole bunch of research on bonefish spawning aggregations, and that also came up as a critical thing that we need to learn about here in the Turks and Caicos Islands in order to properly manage the fishery. That's when a couple times during the year, fish move from the flats and they go to a specific location away from the flats, and they actually go to the offshore environment to spawn. There's a lot more I can do on a full, complete episode of bonefish spawning aggregations. I'll save that for another one. But we need to know the corridors that they take from here, where they spend 99.5% of their time. And that one time a year, they go zipping across to deeper channels, they spawn offshore, and then eventually their larvae come back. They drift in the water column for 41 to 70 days, something like that. And then they recruit, they come back and they settle in another habitat that's very different from this. They don't settle in the mangroves, they don't settle on the seagrass. So we have this interesting idea about connectivity. You can't just think about the adults and the fish that we target as recreational anglers. You have to think about all the different elements of their life history when it comes to understanding connectivity and it comes to the management of bonefish and of other species, right? This is a model. This is when we talk in a scientific, geeky term about these models for understanding connectivity. There's other species where we need to understand their life history, how that is related to their habitat use, how that's related to their diet, and then how they grow. But it's all this larger picture that we can kind of start to paint that helps with the conservation and management of the fish that we love and their home waters. And so that was an amazing part, bringing it back to full circle about, the workshops. That was the common ground. We talked about the basic biology and ecology, and then we talked about the threats. These are areas that often get dredged. Mangroves get removed and people build houses and marinas, or those places where there might be bonefish spawning aggregations, or also sort of deep water areas where you might build a marina and other things. We need to know the basic biology and ecology and where these critters reside at different parts in their life history, so that we can better understand and acknowledge the threats. And then we can manage for those threats. We can come up with solutions. Sorry, my legs are getting a little tired here. And so we can manage for those threats. And we can develop management plans in marine spatial planning, fisheries regulations, all those things that are tied into this idea of sustainability and conservation, right? And how that's connected back to the community. And so I want to really I'm gonna wrap up in thinking about the importance of these community-focused workshops, bringing stakeholders together, government, for-profit enterprise, non-profits, subsistence fishers, parts of the tourism industry, education organizations. It's all part of the equation, and they all have a right to be there, and a right to contribute, and a right to share. And we think about how that's tied back into this idea of top-down versus bottom-up, and not really versus, that we need top-down and bottom-up things in place when it comes to the management and of our fisheries and of our environment. So I'm going to wrap up because I want to go and chase some more bonefish. Seems like the wind has let up a tiny bit. Hopefully this hasn't been too noisy. I think you probably could hear the wind. But stay tuned for more episodes of Home Water Dispatch. I may do another one from South Caicos here, which these used to be my home waters. I lived here for 2.5, almost 3 years. And this is where I fell in love with fishing and fly fishing and bonefish and other things. So stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching. Bye.